as we analyze the different issues. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next module here. Sorry if you're, just tell me if I'm going too fast now. We can slow down. So that first module was just basically to introduce you to the idea that urban design, very shocking, is very complex. So we can't make simple solutions because the problems are very complex. In fact, this is what this subject is about, analyzing all the different issues and see how they work, what are the inflows and what are the outflows of these, of sustainability, of the infrastructure, the heritage conservation, and disaster risk management. Those are the sort of key issues I think that is present everywhere in the Philippines. And then if you go to the module over here, you have a recording of my lecture from like last year. And then you also have a link to the PDF. So if you click this, you should be able to download a copy of Anatomy of a City from a series called The Works by Kate Asher. So this is a bit more simpler. I think this is even like high school level. Bro, the illustrations are very good. And I'm a very kanang visual learner. So I tend to teach the same way with a lot of visuals. So let's list down the different sort of parts of a city or a built environment. And our example here is New York. You can read it in more detail at your own time, but for now, I'll just like focus on the different elements. So number one, streets. So over here, streets are composed of, I think, let me see here. I'll just make a new page. I think people always confuse streets and roads. Like they interchange street and roads. But for the purposes of our class, a street is composed of the sidewalk and the road. So this is all of this from here to here. Let's put a person on there. He is walking. This is the street. In the Philippines, street, road, karsada, parihara. But for the purposes of our class, you have the sidewalk, you have the road, and then sometimes, I'll call this S1. Sometimes you have an island in the middle, like for plants or whatever, and this is called island. And then sometimes you may even have trees along the street, but that's for like discussion later on. But for our class, let's just all agree that this whole thing, sidewalk, etc., is the street. Yes, question. Oh wait, I'm not sharing my screen.
Okay.
I just realized, sorry, I made my blackboard. Anyway, so yes, in the Philippines, we tend to kanang interchange streets and roads, but to make it like more professional, more standard with the international community, our streets will include the sidewalks and the road. So these are separate elements that we need to identify. So as mentioned earlier, the sidewalk is a stock, the road is a stock, and even if there's an island on the road with the trees, those are two different stocks. The trees itself is a stock, the island made of concrete in the middle of the road is a stock. So these are different elements that we need to identify, okay? Okay, good. Let me close this calendars, etc. And then on sort of a larger level, like whole citywide level, each sort of street is like classified by like a hierarchy of roads. And again, you see this interchanging thing happening now. And the bigger picture is called a road, but you don't have like there's a hierarchy of roads, but no hierarchy of sidewalks. But for the purposes of just like moving this discussion forward, I think we're all familiar now. There are highways, there are major roads, and there are minor roads. The key thing, I'm just using a PDF here, right? The images are really good. Highways are for, as the name suggests, high-speed traffic. So anything like 70 kilometers or higher. I think some cities abroad would say highways minimum speed would be 80 or 100. Major roads, the speed would be, let's say, like 60 to 70, around that, kilometers per hour. And minor roads would be anywhere from like 20 to 30 kilometers per hour. And the main factor here is the speed at which the vehicles are moving and the, what they call this, the number of vehicles on that either major road or highway, etc. So again, the stock here in New York City, in a hierarchy of roads, is the, what they call this, number of cars, which is the key kanang, the stock is the road and the inflow is the cars. And that's the, what do you call this? No, budget. Let me just put that into a blackboard over here. Oops. So in a hierarchy of roads, you have highways, major roads, and minor roads. I think highways won't have sidewalks. Let me just, over here, I'll just draw it all. So highway will just have the barriers here, the physical barriers. That's a highway, H-I-G-H. And then you have cars on each side. This is just like my very quick drawing. And the walls aren't that high, where it's like a barrier, a physical barrier. And then no sidewalks on highways, because it's only for cars. Highways. And the speed here is, I think, above 70 kilometers per hour, kph. It depends on cities, from different cities. And then you have the major roads. Major roads. And how a major road would be defined is you might still have sidewalks, but then more likely you'll have some kind of planter box in between that and before you get to the road. So planter box, something like that. And then you get your sidewalk again. And this is anywhere like, let's say 60, let's go lower, 50 to 70 kilometers per hour. So the purpose of the island here, island or your street trees, is very obvious: to protect the people from this high-speed traffic on the road. Just like, these are my cars. And then you have your minor roads, which is just the sidewalk. I think sometimes in the Philippines, our minor roads don't even have a sidewalk. It's just the paved road and then dirt. And then your electric poles, what have you. And your people there, your people there. And then the key thing here is the speed. So ideally, in minor roads, nobody should be driving beyond, let's say, okay, 50 minutes. Let's say nobody should be driving beyond 40 kilometers per hour, but we know that's not the case. Wherever you are in the Philippines, as long as there's space, people will drive as fast as they can. So this is one inherent problem or issue that is not unique to the Philippines, but everywhere, like in developing countries. So let's call this MUD 200 lecture. Okay. Save, not PDF file, save as push up. Okay, the next element here, so I scroll down. We're still on the streets. Each street will have traffic signals, so it's just discussing that. Split phasing, how do you moderate traffic? But I'll just move on to like the next element. Traffic cameras, I have a section on that. So this is more, I guess, urban planning scale, because they're looking at the different ways to control traffic, regulate traffic. And then over here is something that's slowly getting more and more popularity, even though it's been around for a long time. In developed countries, they have what they call kanang traffic calming measures. I think in some areas in Manila and even in Cebu, I think in even your local communities, there are already some traffic calming measures being placed. And the goal of these traffic calming measures is that to reduce the speed, to protect the pedestrians or the people along the street or sidewalks. Okay, but I think this is not so much an issue in the Philippines. I think we are very much used to walking without, or like using our public streets without the traffic calming measures. But there are really some streets in the Philippines that need this, especially those that are very accident prone. So once we go into your like barangay or city level analysis, we may be able to identify streets that need traffic calming measures. So this goes into the further how do you plan? What are different elements to reduce traffic speeds in a safe and efficient way? But what I really want to highlight here are the utilities underneath the streets. Oh, sorry, I think that was the image there. View 2 pages. Display. Here we go. Okay, it's a bit cropped, but I can just draw it over here. The next element is what's underneath the street. Okay. In every city, we have our thoroughfares, streets, whatever, and then underneath that, we have our public utilities. So usually, we have our sewage main here. Sewage main. Our gutters are also here, connected to the sewage main in some way. Sometimes the sewage mains are underneath over here, and together with that, usually above would be our kanang electrical. Sometimes they're underground, but I think most of the time they're above ground. Our electric poles that are spaghetti wiring all over the place. So that's also another element of like a city. Okay, next. And then, as I mentioned earlier, street trees. So we have different various trees. I think some of you who are majoring in landscape will be familiar with the importance of street trees, their benefits. So basically, in what I want to show in this PDF is that in this map of New York, you can clearly see that they documented their existing trees. And I think because the Philippines is much more sort of less developed, we have the advantage of having more green open spaces. But in places like Manila and even places like Cebu, some of our developed areas are very much lacking in green spaces or green open spaces. And this is causing problems like pollution, the usual stuff, no public spaces for the communities, the people living in the city to relax. Most of the public space in the Philippines is really semi-public or owned by private corporations. Like most people would go to the malls to relax. We don't really have enough public parks. So this could be a very big player in sustainability for Philippine cities, especially in places like Antique and where was the other students from? Let me go over here. We got Antique, we got Iligan, Cebu, Osamis, Davao. So we're stuck. The Philippines has been stuck in this idea that maximizing space means building more and more concrete pavements, more buildings. But the developed countries are realizing that even before that, green open space is important for urban and developed areas. So this is just like highlighting a point that maybe your some friends or people that say trees aren't important, then you can just show them this document that trees are important. In fact, they have several kinds of trees for several different situations to help sort of protect urban life. And then over here, as we mentioned earlier, we have pedestrians. And then this is more for traffic management. They have this idea of level of service. So A means like a high level of service, and D is a low level of service, meaning it's cramped, it's hard to move. Some, what they call this, traffic management plans would suggest levels of service between like C and D would be passable. But it really depends on the location. Some areas in the city would be okay with the level D service. Some areas would need a level A service. So if, for example, a level of service A would be desirable for maybe residential areas, and let me zoom in a bit here. So the description is a walkway with LOSA. Pedestrians basically moved in desired paths without altering their movements in response to other pedestrians. Walking speeds are freely selected and conflicts between pedestrians are unlikely. So that's about 130 square feet per pedestrian. So they have 130 square feet to move around in. So sorry, it's in feet because it's an American book. And then as you go down, it becomes more and more crowded until you get level of service D, where the freedom of select individual walking speeds, the freedom to select walking speeds and to bypass other pedestrians is restricted because there's so many people on that sidewalk or on that street. Where crossing or reverse flow movements exist, the probability of conflicts is high, and its avoidance requires frequent changes in speed and position. So if you look at very crowded cities like Manila, even more crowded cities like New York, Tokyo, you see those images of people, like it's a sea of people walking on a sidewalk. That's a LOSD, level of service D. Okay, and then another thing here, another element of the city is the public transportation network. So in developed cities, they have subways, railways, etc. In the Philippines, I think there's only one or I think two now in Manila. And then what I want to showcase here is that if you look at New York subway system, it's very much a straight or like very linear. So if you see here, I'll just take a snip. So beginning of the service goes here and then goes to the city center here, something like that into there, something like that into there. So it's mostly north-south movement and just a bit of east-west. I think this image is oriented north. So north is up here. But if you look at one of the most efficient subway maps or subway systems, Tokyo, it's more centralized. And what do I mean by that? It comes out more radially. So if you like draw this, it's kind of like spiraling outwards and you have different lines connecting to the city center. So more points of entry connecting to the city center. Whereas New York, just basically more limited. And I think that also is impacted by the geography of New York. So if you go back here, New York is separated by different sort of rivers. And then that limits their capability to create a more extensive subway network. And that also is another problem with the Philippines. We don't have enough sort of land mass to create efficient subway networks or rail networks in general. Moscow is more radial. And then London, again, is going more linear, but on an east-west axis, left to right. And then if you go over here, you can see that the number of passengers per year, the more efficient the subway system or train system, the more passengers they can service. So in Moscow, this is in Russia, they have 3.2 billion passengers per year. Tokyo has 2.7, New York has 1.4, and then London seems to be the least efficient at only 886 million. But maybe because they're using other modes of transportation. But this was just some comparisons for developed countries. So I think the Philippines will need some kind of railway system. It's just that we're not there yet because it's very expensive, very difficult to develop. So we need other modes of transportation. The next element of the city over here is the public market. So let me see, zooming in here. So this is a map of market points in a section of New York. So you have different places, Hunts Point Cooperative Market, food distribution businesses, Hunts Point Terminal Market, Food and Fish Market. So wherever you are, I'm sure you have your like major public market. In Cebu, I think it's Carbon. And then that's for the Pangmasa public market. We have our malls. And then in our different barangays, there are designated sort of Pangmasa na market, while the barangays themselves don't really have malls. Most people would go to the CBD or the central business district to get to their malls. And the impact of this is that ideally, this should give more people more options, more ways, or more places to shop. Unfortunately, in the Philippines, a bit more limited because people tend to favor the high-end malls over shopping at their local sort of public market, because the idea is like it's cleaner, it's better, and that traveling to specific areas within the city, and because there's so limited malls, those malls become like major sort of what's the word, traffic problems, because everyone's trying to get there. There's a lot of people trying to get into a small space. So to alleviate traffic, if you're interested in that, we might need more or like better public markets so that people will be less attracted to the private malls and more interested in visiting their local market. Okay. Next is power consumption or electricity. So this one is, if we go back to my board here, you can't see this in the street, but this is more inside the residences. The things that urban designers can control is the location of these telephone poles. But for the most part, we can just advise that it can be set back for how many meters. But the main sort of, I guess, for the most part, the main people who are in charge of making these telephone poles, electrical poles, are your local electric company. So it's really the electric company. For Cebu, it's VECO. And I'm sure in your cities, you have your own electric companies. Okay, and then this means we also need to identify where are your local power plants. And I think in built-up areas, electricity is more cheaper, and then the further you go out, it becomes more expensive. But that depends on your like electric or like your local electricity provider. Okay. Next. So we're now like moving on to energy. So electricity is a source of energy. And while we're on the topic of sustainability, other sources of green power include, what do you call this? Yeah, wind harvesting, solar panels, hydroelectric, geothermal, and biomass. I think I've had some students in the past who were near, or their city had a geothermal plant. But what's really emerging now, at least in Cebu City and also in Manila, are solar panels. In fact, just the other day, I have a list over here. Okay. Oh, sorry. Just the other week, I've had someone come up to me for like solar panel installations. Let me just stop presenting here. So this is Ulrich Solar. I'm not advertising it. I'm just showing you that they exist. So currently you can get solar panels from starting at like 75,000 up to, what's this? 350,000 pesos. My house over here in Cebu, our solar panel provider is not Ulrich Solar. It's a company called The Green. And I can really tell you it works because if you do plan to get solar, or if you have a client that wants to get solar, you can expect a significant reduction in energy consumption. Currently, a year ago, even before Typhoon Odette hit Cebu, our electrical consumption per month went down from 10,000 pesos per month to 500 pesos per month. But the issue there, the big challenge about convincing people to go solar is the high initial cost. But I think really this is becoming more and more available and more and more viable for everyone, not just like those who can afford it. I think it will go down even more. So that's something interesting to look into if you're interested in solar farms, solar panel studies for your research or thesis or whatever. Okay, so in the US, they have several power plants here, so you can read about it, but the system of like power distribution usually comes in, or is similar in the Philippines as it is in the US. You have a number one here, a main power plant, and then it goes into a transmission substation, and then it goes into a transmission lines, which is kind of blurred here in my image, and then it goes into an even smaller, what did they call this? Step down. Let's see here. For New York City Power Center, blah, 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 it is a, I think it's basically it's still called a substation, but it's a lot smaller than the one over here, like closer to the power plant. So it starts out with the power plant, and the substations gradually become smaller until it's connected to your local power line, which is then connected to your home. Okay, and the advantage for me with solar panels is because in the Philippines, we are half the time, or maybe even more, 6 to 7 months, it's clear, sunny skies because of our tropical climate. And if you can get more and more people into solar, the solar panel generates even more energy than you need. So depending on the system you get, there's three kinds of systems. There's on-grid, off-grid, and hybrid. But all of them generate more power than what is needed in your house in a day. And then you can actually give power back to your local electricity provider, and then you can set it up so they will pay you for the excess money, the excess energy that your solar panels generate. So I think that's very exciting. Okay, and then we're over here. Another element is water. So we need drinking water. Where do we get our drinking water? In the Philippines, we get them from deep wells and our water reservoirs. I think your local community, wherever you are, you have some combination of both. And then the main goal for development in the Philippines is to maintain those rainwater reservoirs and deep wells. Basically limit development so that we don't damage our existing clean water sources. So I think that will be visible in your, what do you call this? Zoning maps, local zoning maps. So over here, I already alluded to it earlier. So together with the sewage system underground, you also have your potable water system. Usually, let me see here. Where's my blackboard? Over here. So I'll just make another color. Wherever you are, usually the sewage system is at a lower elevation, meaning deeper into the ground, versus your potable water system, which I will color in sky blue. Oh, sorry. Let me erase this. Usually the potable water system is above ground. Sometimes they're even above the sidewalk. If you see in some rural areas, like some areas here in Talamban, the potable water system is just above the sidewalk like that, like if there is a sidewalk, but usually it's dirt. And then it's connected to a meter, which is then connected to the house. So if you've seen those meters, they look like these things, and they're all bunched up together. Actually, let me just Google that image. Water meters in Philippines. So it's these things, and then you see them bunched up outside residential areas. And I think this can be both a good and bad thing, but if it gets too many like this, I think this is actually very organized. You can see some in the kind of, I guess, not so organized, na nagtapok-tapok na gid ang mga meters ba, and that's something we need to control or like regulate so everyone gets water and then it doesn't get damaged. The problem with having the water lines above ground is you can have vehicles come by, it could damage the pipes, reduce water, etc. And then if you guys were aware, last December 2021, Cebu was hit with Typhoon Odette, and it caused both a shortage in electricity and a shortage in water. It's because the typhoon was so strong, it damaged the local water provider, the Metro Cebu Water Distribution Companies, that's MCWD. The typhoon was so strong it damaged a bunch of infrastructure, and then the MCWD wasn't able to provide water for everyone, and also electricity was gone from January all the way up to February of 2022. So those who live in Cebu remember that. So um, if we're talking about sustainability, the current method of distributing power and electricity in the Philippines is very much weak or vulnerable to natural disasters, depending on where you are. I think for the cities on the western side of the Philippines, you're more protected from the typhoons because most of the typhoons are coming in from the east. But that's just something, another stock to think about or element to worry about when you're doing urban design. Okay, next. So this is just a diagram of water tanks, how they work. Basically, if you have an office building, water is pumped from the basement level or wherever the water source is. And if they have a water tank, it's pumped into that. And then from the water tank, it's distributed to different offices or spaces within the building, basically via gravity. So it's just like gravity will bring the water down. And then consumption over here, you have some what do you call this? Figures for consumption. A washing machine on average uses 56 gallons of water to complete a load. A standard toilet uses 6 gallons per flush. A dishwasher uses 24 gallons. And a typical shower uses 7 gallons for every minute. So this is American standard. I think in the Philippines, we generally use less. I think 7 gallons for one shower is a bit much. Dugay sila kayo sa mag-shower. Kusog kayong agad sa tubig. And then, as I mentioned earlier, wastewater collection. Usually in American cities, the wastewater lines in the center underneath the road. And I think for the Philippines, our wastewater is underneath the sidewalks. Okay, I think they're constantly expanding. So if they put it in the middle of the road, that means the road must be closed. And for the most part in Cebu, I don't see a lot of road closures in the middle unless they're doing like asphalt work. Most of the plumbing work or sanitary work is usually I see it on the sidewalk. It might be different in your local community. So the thing in the Philippines that's also similar to America is the use of septic tanks. But in the Philippines, our septic tanks, at least in the residential areas, aren't connected to the larger sewage system. They are, let me just draw it. I think our architects will know about this. Usually when we design a septic tank for a house, let me just draw a house here. I'll switch to my white pen. So a house would usually have one septic tank and it's connected like this. But in the US, the septic tank would be connected to the bigger sewage system. In the Philippines, it just stops there. Usually 2 chambers to digest or like basically decompose or digest the sewage. And ideally, I think every year, every 2 years or something like that, depending on where you are. I think some cities would even do every 5 years. The septic tank needs to be cleaned out. Otherwise, it gets full, and that's when you have like backlog. The septic comes back up. But I think there are systems in place for the newer septic tanks to prevent that from happening. So yeah, that's just something that I wanted to point out for septic tanks in the Philippines versus septic tanks abroad. And then other techniques, I think our architects will be familiar, catch basins to make sure to absorb that extra rainwater during rainy season. And then we have the sewage treatment plants that I think we have some in the Philippines. In Cebu, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure if we have an STP. I think we do. It's just not like super well known where they are. And then finally, I think this is one of the last elements, garbage. So wherever you have people, you have garbage. So the sustainability of an area, a barangay, or a city also depends on how the garbage is managed. So we have the dry garbage, and then we subdivide the dry garbage to biodegradable and non-biodegradable, and then we have the wet garbage, which is like sewage, as I mentioned earlier. And this is just a diagram of like the landfill or the garbage disposal areas in New York. So a bunch of them are in the Queens area over here, and the Bronx, etc., etc. So hopefully, maybe in the next before midterms, we can locate where our garbage disposal areas are. I'll do one for Cebu, and like maybe we can do it in the barangay level. But I think garbage disposal in the Philippines is usually done at the municipal or city level. And then something that we don't have in the Philippines, street cleaning. It's basically just clean as you go or no cleaning at all in the Philippines. So those are basically the elements or the anatomy of a city. I'll just list it down here. So number one in urban planning is really the street. And then everything inside the street, traffic, we have the sidewalks, traffic signs, etc. And the next was, I can't remember, this is the next one after street. The street trees, that's also included. And after that is the supermarket. Oh yeah, I'll put the street trees under street as well. Street trees. Then next we have the markets. I will just call that food. Where does the food come from? Next we have, power, electricity, and then finally waste. Waste is divided into solid, equal to garbage. And then we have the, I'll just call it wet. I'll just call it dry and wet. That is our sewage. Okay, so that's basically a simplified version of the systems within a city, barangay, or municipality. And then in the next session, we'll check out, let me see, what do I have planned here? I made this module, let's see. Okay, urban planning and urban design, and then we'll talk more in depth about sustainability next week. For now, I just want you to process that, and then we have a we can also start making our initial city profile. So you can just write this down. Oh, the date is not updated. Let me just edit that. Let me save this image and go back. So we'll also be doing this next week. I'm just going to introduce this to you so you won't be kind of shocked that you're going to do this. Also, I have a quiz here for you guys. So a quick quiz to check your understanding of thinking in systems. I can just move the deadline to later tonight. Let's see. Let's move this to 9 p.m. Or actually, let's just make it 10 p.m. para dili kaya picky. So just 5 questions. And actually, it's already 8. I don't want to hold you guys off for too long. I want to talk more about our assignment for next meeting. Over here, the city profile. So I've given this assignment to my undergrad students, and their work was like way too good. So we can make something simpler. You can use PowerPoint. You don't have to use like Canva. I think this is done with Canva, and maybe some of them have used like Photoshop or even Illustrator to lay this out. You can just use PowerPoint. And the main thing you want to highlight is over here. This will be due on the 10th. Oh crap, I have a meeting on the 10th. Yeah, we'll meet September 10 from like 6 to 7, so we can work on it together. And then I'll leave you the extra 2 hours to clean it up, make it presentable. And then on the 17th, we'll discuss your different kanang city profiles so we understand what's going on in your city or barangay. So I'll give you the option. You want city? Okay, barangay is also fine with me. So you need to write down the name or your of the city or barangay that you want to study. I would advise you study your local city and local barangay because you know where everything is. Put in the area or in square meters. I think usually square kilometers is very large. And then population data. Oh, this is something I need to give you. Let me go back to the module here. Open with, let me just change the date so it's not confusing. No. Change the date and the time. So we will do this for the whole session next week. And then we'll do a reporting the week after that. So this will be September 10. Maybe a little bit more. Okay. About like that. Number 10, and we will submit it by something simple line. Doesn't have to be super detailed. Just like these basic informations. We'll call that 9 p.m. Okay. And then just list down basic issues that you see or observe in your local city or barangay. You can write down pollution, what kind of pollution, traffic congestion, which streets have the most traffic. Some areas, some classes I've taught also mentioned lack of potable water because I have some students in the very rural areas of northern Mindanao where water is an issue. And then your kind of initial thoughts. Doesn't have to be architecture. Like, how can we solve these problems? Let me just rewrite that. So you don't have to have an architecture background. Like, just based in your experience, like living in Cebu, living in the Philippines, how can we solve these problems? That's like an initial thought because our final will be more concrete, more realistic solutions. We solve these problems. Again, with a systems thinking approach. Let me make this regular. Now, okay. So I've given this to undergrads and postgrad MMO. I think you can handle this even better. Okay, maybe like that. Okay, save. Any questions so far? Yes, go ahead.
Sir, we have on September 10 kasi sir, we will have our vote taking po for new architects.
Oh no. Oh.
What can I do, sir? Should I
Yes.
still join the class, sir, or should I submit only the PowerPoint presentation, sir?
I think for your case, yeah, you can submit. You can't leave that. So,
Got it.
I also have an event a Saturday evening, which is a very small event though. I'll use the hotel lobby's internet connection so I can hold the class. Anyway, anyone else who will be busy during that day? Wala na? Okay. So I'll go through the modules again. Everyone should have their own copy of the Anatomy of a City. You can peruse it, read through it at your own time. I'll end a bit early today. Okay, I didn't have dinner yet, and just sort of to let you absorb the information because I feel like medyo daghan to itong discuss. And then over here, wait, I stopped sharing my screen by accident. So the activity of city profile, we'll try to finish it within the session, basically from 6 to 9, we'll be working on it. I'll be with you from 6 to 7, sort of to guide you. And then from 7 to 9, you can do it on your own, I think. Okay, adults naman mo. Let me change the image here. Change image. Insert. There's a new one. Where the heck did that go? Is it on my desktop again? Ah, here we go. Okay. What, that didn't change? And maybe it saved as Photoshop. Hang on. So just list it down. You don't need to make some very good graphics. You can just list it down. I'm more interested in what you consider an issue. What is causing that issue and how do you think you can solve it? Save as JPEG. Now, for some reason, everything is going to my desktop today. Okay, there we go. And I think I can discuss more as to what kinds of images can you use, what kinds of websites can you use to get this data. Okay. So let's see, A4 landscape, word counts about 300 to 500 maximum. I think we can increase this if you really want to kind of talk more about it. These are 500 to 1000. File size 10 MB maximum because you might get longer. And then submission is, I'll just call it file type. And you could submit a PowerPoint, say PDF, PPT, or even a docx Word file, depending on like which is your preference. Or Word doc. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. And then the websites you can use specifically for this population data. I'll put it up here. Population data reference. I usually go to atlas.com. And then wherever you are, you should have your own sort of population data over here. Let me go through the chats. Let's see. District 1, Siblaom Antique. Atlas. District 1, Municipality of Sibalom. Sorry, I'm a bit dyslexic. Sibalom in Antique. Your population data is, oh, it's over here. So you see here household population, and this is historical population. So what I want is a historical population. We'll talk about household population maybe later on. We'll go with a simpler one. Number of people in your district. So historically, District 1, Sibalom, has had about 1,000 people, and it's slowly increasing. So again, this would be an example of stock inflow and outflow. The stock is the population. The inflow is the number of people coming into that district. So currently, it's rising. So we could, as we go through this class, we'll try to figure out why is the population rising. But I think already now you know why. Okay, maybe there's an increase in job opportunities, increase in development, and usually these things go hand in hand. More schools, more offices attract more people, and more people working there would create even more schools, which would attract even more people. So as discussed earlier, this is an example of a reinforcing loop or a positive feedback loop. So this usually denotes something good is going on in your city. The opportunity here is that because it's still at a lower population of 1,500, you still have a lot of chances to create plans to protect your natural environment. The problems with cities like Manila is that it's already so dense. It doesn't have any new, or like, it basically used up all its natural resources. So now it's struggling to maintain its growth or like sustain its growth. So this will be very interesting to analyze. District 1, Sibalom. So we'll go into the different factors as to why this is increasing, et cetera, et cetera. But for now, we'll just do like a basic analysis based on what you observe in your local area. So notice there's also a a slight dip in population growth rate in 2007. And I think I can see this all throughout the Philippines in my different classes with students from all over the Philippines. The middle of like 2000 to 2005, a lot of cities decreased in population. I think this was an era of maybe mass migration, like going abroad. That's why the population decreased almost everywhere. So we could maybe analyze that as well. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, we need to study further. But yes, I'll put here the website, philatlas.com, onto the instructions over here. Option data reference, field, just use, I'll put here. philatlas.com. Okay. And then we'll work on that together on Saturday. And for that one student who's not here on Saturday, just watch the recording. Attach link. Okay. So next week we'll be looking at your local communities and what are the different problems, and sort of fitting it in to this like theme of how do we make cities or municipalities or even barangays develop in a more sustainable way. Okay. So any questions before I stop recording?
Will you post, sir, yung recorded lecture today?
Yes, I will post them. I'll put them into our canvas, and maybe also our like Facebook page. So you have the recordings here, and I think I'll make a new page for our like a new recordings or new module for our recordings. So also one more thing. I'm still sharing my screen right here. We have this is new. I didn't do this last time I taught this, but I think it would be good to have a discussions thread. Basically, any articles that you might think are interesting, like from the newspapers, or most of us are from the academe. Maybe you have some reports that you want to share or talk about or discuss in the class. As long as it fits within our topic of like systems, or I mean like issues in urban development, you can put it here and we can talk about it. And then I think for this module, I think everyone should at least submit one article, news report, whatever, and this will go to your class standings. So anything, it could be a newspaper article, website article, and I'll check this, I think in the midterm. So basically we should have one article for every module by the end of the midterms. So this will count to your class standing. Okay, so I'll go back to my module student view, because I think some of you are new first year. Some of you are not familiar with Canvas yet, but this is what it should look like. So you have your promissory notes, your short quiz, the assignment for next week. You can start working on it now, but we'll be working on it together as well on Saturday. And then discussion thread for any articles or ideas you might have and you want us to discuss it, you can put it in here. Okay. Okay, seems like one question.